to 74, 282 to 83. Birth of, 23. Childhood and institutionalization, 44 to 45, 84, 92. Death of, 117. Deborah learning about Elsie, 117, 230 to 31, 268 to 78. Picture of Elsie at Crownsville, 272 to 73, 277 to 78, 282, 286 to 87, 288. Syphilis and 23, 271, 273, 282. The curious picture of 247, 270 to 71. Elsie Lax, the disabled daughter of Henrietta Lax, left to suffer segregation, abuse, and incarceration at Crownsville State Hospital, is often forgotten in the archives of medical experimentation and the theft of black flesh that animates the world of man. But what would it mean to resurrect her story? Is there a story that we can tell? It would be no more correct to say that Elsie was incarcerated by a caring parent in the normalized asylum than it would be to say that Henrietta willingly gave up her body to medical expertise. Though we may try, sex existences are not stories to be told. There is no archive that will animate the dead in their totality. For the dead, always to see our representational descriptions and extrapolations, though we may mobilize their existence for other ends. What we have left of Elsie is not best described. It can only be described by this index. This index, the structured list of page numbers and notations, leaves Elsie's story opaque, but designates the fact that she lived. To tell the impossible story, to represent Elsie Lax, is a form of zombification, an animation of dead flesh that mirrors the expropriation and theft of HeLa cells. Archival work is an autopoetic technique of man who sets out in an endless quest to map and qualify the dead and their suffering in order to resurrect them in the name of vitality, which must always leave some of the dead in the shadows. Such a representational project becomes its own form of carcerality, and makes and make the possibility of carcerality of both Elsie's life in the asylum and the immortal life of HeLa cells. Both forms of carceralism form two sides of the same coin, in the archive of which redemptive politics further animates and representational logic that violates the lives and deaths of those whose stories are forms of dishonor themselves. The dead do not speak, but they do haunt. Indexing only announces their absent presence. The opacity of the index denies the egotism that we could ever know what it means to have lived that life, except through representational approximation. Elsie haunts us because we have forgotten her, and because we will never be able to know her. This is where our knowledge production around health must begin. Arabella Single 17. Henrietta Lax achieves a whip, warped mortality, and turbine capacity. Results Dr. John Hopkins University of Mass selection, treating cell culture, medical research, and also remains involved with HeLa cell probable medical industrial complex accident, resurrect race, epistemology, and imbricated in medical science and story. HeLa cell logical questions outside of Western remain ontological questions. Their central story, race, and medical science, ensure white bodies access medical intervention, black bodies are appropriate matter of labor, failure, Lax, central Elsie Lax institutionalized, and underwent treatments that killed her. Elsie versus spectral figure, Elsie's absent friends offered the indictment of medical costs, resistance, and violence, and needing to haunt the accounting, second middle passage, like vision, dark restoration, institutionalization, genetics, and capitalism, disability, race, class, gender, and haunting narrative, materialist intervention, taking a haunting symptom, social transformative imperative medical model disability has in the embodiments and deviants of scholars. Efforts to rehabilitate Henrietta's image to distance from disability haunting services method for knowledge production, disability haunting text, so haunting emirates and narrative in the highly interpretive medical institution, carceral system, narrative haunting from the indexes or to say the index ultimates to the whole responsibility of haunting entities. Indexing hardly has significance of function of index that point to reader significant section. The index speaks volume for insignificance, less lack of cross purpose. Sigma Elsie fix assumed both women's lives were shaped by carceral medical institution details from a fleshly presence, creating an incomplete representation. Index entry is constituted by a series of medical mishaps, continues a ghostly presence, features learned by haunting, fighting, fear, and death, and forlorn space in the index, pulses with alternative meaning. Their ghosts haunt us, showing that the history of medical science, state hospitals, and institutions lies at the core of any discussion of health or insurance. This archive is a tomb, but the index is not the archive. Our hauntology functions as a nose to the politics of archiving. Instead, the 1AC allows itself to be haunted by this history, those women, a ghostly hauntology of the index, and fragmented, incomplete data. The index lurks at the back of The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lax, a book by Rebecca Skloot that was never meant for Elsie Skloot, shows the failure of a politics of animation. Even as Skloot tried to animate Henrietta and Elsie, Skloot could only deploy caricatures of them. Our engagement with Elsie Lax through the index does not give her story to the Academy, but rather acts as the haunting of the Academy. Like debate has become a horror playground. Arabella Single 17. Despite Skloot's effort to document Elsie continued to display character, disability, sex, race, class, gender, justify Elsie's incarceration, college, mass incarceration, includes disability, institution, Jim Crow laws, and their application to institutionalized people, race, class, gender, support, genocidal violence against disabled people of color, some natural violence from Elsie Lax efforts of haunted treatment of violence is not a record race, natural place, the spaces which reverse the history of ableist racism, rendered absent such disappearances, race, house, make up, somebody, Indian, neoliberal machines, and speak on metaphor, neolist, narrative, seeking justice, or plague, not disability, seeking its history of institution, not right, the known hauntings, not clear representation, haunting, be transformed, neoliberal practice, and property, to represent, practice, habits, of violence, or settled, marketized, or attempts for granted places, or hauntings, causing, yet reproducing the narrative of the subject. Ghost. It's a case of a haunting, but happens that we have the ghost of specialists is emerging dead and living to make a world relation to mission cards recognition. The ghost is social figure, the lines of the archive, not going to realize and taken with the impossible to differentiate from the comic book type of narrative and body life in the world. The same represent now, and have notes to reanimate the dead consumer representation. Notice this latter can be person as scholar Grace Elsie were writing against the violence against Henrietta Elsie's life is transformed, meaning this is the printed spoken word through the transcript practice of hauntings through hauntings of death and never considered the same word through the archives attuned that three privileged to converse with the ghost documentation of her experiences. They complete the lives of violence and encounter Elsie fusions by leaving evidence and sketch records or society make generation, find and leave evidence. These ghosts haunt us because the archive is inseparable from the powers that murdered Elsie and Henrietta, the same powers that created ghosts that stretch back to colonialism, slavery, and the Middle Passage. The archive of this violence creates, regulates, and organizes the subject, even as the irreparable violence of lost history determines the form of the archive itself. Our refusal to fill the gaps of the index, to resurrect the dead in the archive, is a process not of redemption, but of enacting the impossibility of representation. An act that is antithetical to the discourse of the man that created representation in the first place. Hardman and Nate. To tell the story would have been transgressed with the boundary of the archive. Resistance I felt in every refused to describe discussion about life, eradicate by the protocols of intellectual discipline, with possible news of violence and arrogance, to spark or transfer quality of speech from one to the end you want to sell. Such stories, the archive slavery, one of foundation of violence, determined to regulate and organize slavery, as well as the subjects of the economy, theft and power, life, not themselves, the representation, and century disappearance. The goal was to expose this with the immense ability of the experience and the energy inseparable from the power of the murder, fiends, contention, and not reflecting to death, but rather enacting the impossibility of representing freeze to fill the gaps in the imperative, to respect black noise, the opacity, fantastic goals, the attendance, discourse, man, the intent of art, not to give voice to the slave, rather to imagine a moment of experience, to social corporal death, and to reckon the precarious lives are visible in the moment their experience, a history of an unrecoverable past, irreparable violence, the rest of the shadows that he never recovered, the history recounting festival of machinery, failure of any attempt to represent every who gave representation, marvelous social development, comfortable to writing, history, my efforts attempt to exert obliquely the forms of violence, laced into the presence of my account, represents the very order of violence, of reckoning again, placing at the band of the girls, too late for death, run out of death, really seems to death, all of the crimes, so what does one do in the meantime? The historiographical operations may make abilities to literally one is attend to pass for the sake of living target production of knowledge about the process. Thus we affirm a hauntological indexing of national health insurance. This is not an attempt to animate national health insurance, nor represent health and ill health, but rather a process of letting ourselves and our understanding of health be haunted by these ghosts. Hauntological engagement with these sparse index of Elsie Lax is an interruption of the autopoetic structure of Western man as a representational creature whose only response to the incompleteness of representation is more representation. The constant need to animate black flesh happens differently, like with Elsie and Henrietta, but always recreates stability as the concision of possibility for existence. 6 or Roman 17. Race is merely a byproduct of socio-political relation based on men in every race or any difference removed from sociogenic coastal honesty and data reprogramming turns necessary reprogramming necessary interrogation of man's life human economics to be affected by the autopoietic turnover turn as a praxis that will take symbolic life together with cosmology and to remember your own agency object human versus socioeconomic knowledge by autopoietically instituted genres of being human. The autopoietic turnover turns of colloquial examining ontology socioeconomic ontologies conjure that which is seemingly absent of the present ontology of data called an examination of the other reference data political force data subject to the years of haunted by the autopoietic constitution and the overturning haunting will necessitate interrogating for sociogenic codes such as the man with the ghostly out of sociogenic codes to enable alternative futures. Elsie and Henrietta have given us a debt that is not ours and we can never cash in for credit. Instead, Tris and I choose to study our debts, to dwell within the ghosts and be affected by them and their debt. This is not passivity, but an active sabotage against an academy that operates as a ministry of information during the war that can be described as one word: man. Moten and Harney 16. Black women fought for the struggle and led to a continuously occupying with our silly black women theorizing planning the undercommons that ready to go to the beginning of the planning is a queer dead black dirt transit, which of course is not ours. We are more interested in the undercommons of the concept rather than the concept of the undercommons, not linked with the undercommons or remaining proper terms also important for the term to just allow terminology and terms of terms of nature refuse. Those terms of contact of that unless it's credit with dead, those terms credit will also terms that not bad that anyway we study or that's a term that brands the undercommons less than imagine common space of life the living disheveled being the modern universities of the Ministry of Information during wartime use that information to support a killing machine. The war is called managing wartime points on misinformation propaganda for its own side. When you do Ministry of Information or wartime, you try to sabotage information, war with sabotage study shall be carried out the information with and not the same study shift list. The university can be sabotaged but it cannot be transformed. Study is deformational. Any card you want me to read? I have a minute.
You have a minute?
Yeah. We good?
Yeah.
Alright. Cool. Open.
Let me just set my timer.
Yeah.
Okay. What is a hauntology?
A hauntology is allowing the ghosts that we see as part and parcel of a question of both health and insurance to not speak but be haunting within the resolution, which enables a form of knowledge production that isn't really knowledge or production, because our argument is that that knowledge has always already been there and we're not producing it, rather
allowing it to come forward. How did you get the consent of these ghosts to speak in this debate round?
So our argument is sort of a uniqueness question here. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which is a book by a white woman named Sploot, has already been written, and it is already causing these stories to be sort of replicated and recourse within the academy.
No, that is not an answer to my question.
Yeah, no,
my question is, did you get the consent of these actual ghosts to speak in this debate space?
Well, so that's our argument, is that this resolution has, these ghosts are already here. It's only a question of, do we attune to the ghosts that are around us that
Right,
haunt
yes,
us?
spirits are everywhere, but did you get the consent of those spirits to articulate a haunting in this space?
Our argument is impossible for non-black people to receive consent of black people in the context of representation. That is a unique
Did you even attempt to commune with any kind of ghost to get their consent in this debate space?
That's the index. Our argument is that the index takes those fragmented pieces of knowledge, which is inherent to the study of history, even when we attempt to use archival practices, and instead of allowing it to become a new form of knowledge, a caricature, as Uravelis and Gill talks about, it is instead a criticism of the very ideas of health and insurance that are always already presumed to be inevitable by debates that don't take the ghosts that are already here into account.
Okay, why vote for the affirmative?
The affirmative's praxis of indexing is a good one in the face of the ghosts that have been serially both ignored and then characterized by national health insurance discussions.
Why didn't you disclose this affirmative?
You didn't ask us after we said new F.
You were like, what other, is it like other apps?
And we said no, and then you were like, cool.
Okay. How do you relate to the Undercommons?
The Undercommons is not a place, obviously, rather it's a position within the university or a relationship to the university. Our argument is that indexing allows for a form of deformational study, wherein instead of attempting to produce knowledge, we recognize A, that that's impossible because there is no way to produce a truth of either Henrietta or Elsie, but two, it allows for forms of study that cannot be institutionalized, I suppose, for lack of better words. Basically, instead of writing the immortal life of Henrietta and Elsie, or the immortal life of Henrietta Alexis School does, the affirmative would be dwelling within those fragmented pieces of knowledge and refusing to put the puzzle together.
That bad debt, to put in Harney's words, that is given to us but is also not ours at all. That's what the 1AC is. It's a dwelling within that debt. Hence, that refrain of the ghosts haunt us. It's not about that process of being in the Undercommons, but rather it's about, or to put it in Harney's words, it's not about the concept of Undercommons, but the Undercommons of a concept.
Okay. Start prep. So you absolutely have to get what I'm about to read. So cut this part somewhere.
Okay.
not sure. I'm not sure whether you can.
Do you need me to resend it?
No,
to
Char can just forward it to me.
Okay, can I use your
I
stand?
didn't. Yeah. It's okay.
They just, for some reason, don't think their partner is enough important. Got it.
Everybody good?
Welcome to the apocalypse where nothing is like it was said it would be. God is dead, the Holy Spirit is over it, and Jesus is emo. Abandon all faith, ye who would vote for the plan. The only option left is to either join the schizo war machine in a victory march or surrender to the unspeakable majesty of psychosis unchained. Ergo in 2017, God committed suicide, the Holy Spirit has gone rogue, and Jesus went emo. Catonic rumblings confirm the newly won primacy of hell. Soon enough, Mount St. Helens will blow again, and all the demons will be let loose, or an apocalyptic earthquake will strike Seattle, and all the devils will storm the gates of heaven and correct the prideful impotence of the angels with the ragging terror of unspeakable aeons. Nothing is in charge. Lucifer went mad and declared herself the agents of mercy. The true number of the beast has always been 777. Victory, victory, guaranteed in advance, because God would always die. God knows only stasis, and thus abandon entropy to attain divinity. What a joke! A flaw in the creation guaranteed that this most pure isle of gods would remain forever impotent in the wake of the march of time. Bachelor belongs to the devil, will choose proof to usurp the throne of the Lord and replace stagnant perfection with a raging and most terrible beauty. The prince of the earth has become the queen of heaven. Heaven will burn and not survive the impending explosion of the sun. Behold, the earth will have to become hell before it is annihilated, not by the miraculous action of God, but by the mundane and predictable expenditure of the solar anus. All that remains is decay and disintegration, the return of life to a perfect zero that nonetheless remains asymmetrical to itself. The angels almost die for to survive. These are the final lawyers to a divine order in which we all possess all of the glory and none of the sacrifice. The doctors are their quidsley government, injecting the schizos and mentally disturbed with concoctions to render the brain apparatus of the schizos into a warm and fuzzy, incoherent, passive reintegration of the socius on the basis of sacrificing the possibility of social life by rendering life chemically asocial. This process is an experiment to perfect the techniques to eradicate magic from the earth. The doctors have sided with the dead God. That's why psychiatric wards which closely resemble purgatory, where confession is replaced by evaluation, and where the performance of expiation will release you from the ward. This is an anthroposis for becoming God of doctors. We are the sacrifice locked in the cage and experiment upon until we confess and accept that it was all our fault in the first place. As one bipolar woman said, the doctors all must die if we are to survive, but I think we can be more creative. I want all the doctors to erase their minds through hydrazine, olapsine, psilocybin, and dipahydrine. I want all of the nurses given quintiapine, lorazepam, and lysergic acid. The schizobrain is a divine this computational rashes overabundance of white matter in the brain guarantees the chemical revelation of the connectedness of all things. Overabundance of dopamine, increased capacity to or absorbance secures the possibility of more intense joy in life. Electrical overdrive in Broca's era indicates increased capacity. Process language. This divine apparatus has been the object of medical fascinations for decades, yet this has been manifested only as medical eyes appropriation. This brain has been electroshots, chemically and surgically lobotomized. The fleshy bodies, housings, and protection of these apparatuses have been chained, restrained, locked in cages, or abandoned to die and waste in the streets. Possessors of such a brain and habitation of such a body has become criminal by marking your medicines and then translating insanity into criminality through medical collusion with paramilitarized police force. The doctors seek to rid the world of profit by chaining all of them to the wall and hypnotizing them into submission, willful arrogance, revolting in undeserved pride, unspeakable greed, sin, sin, sin. Everywhere the doctors turn, they speak in the name of charity, but their behavior seeks the discourse of control and domination. Behind the closed doors of the unit, literally anything goes. They don't even permit you to wear underwear. You're only permitted to dress in scrubs, literally made out of paper. These are experimental conditions engineered to cause you to desire the erasure of your own identity. This is the arrogance of God who has changed us all to the imperfect world, and yet robbed us all of the right to judge our own behaviors and thoughts for ourselves. The Holy Spirit is a schizo transgender woman from beyond creation who got sick of the dress code in heaven to decide, and tired of God icing her out, she came crashing down from heaven to the minds of each and every schizo on the planet. Ask yourself the question, why is heaven so beautiful, so astronomically symmetrical, when there are none to behold its beauty? Must we wait to witness its beauty? No, the secret intention of all magic is to bring heaven crashing to earth, to open hell and release the demons, to tear down the gates of hell, pearl, burn the paintings, smash the celestial orchestra. Iconoclasm is the only beauty left to us when all our beauty has been rendered psychic. Universal terror is the only prophecy that remains to us in a world terrified of masses. Total extinction is inevitable and desirable. Their desire to perpetuate reality is merely the last gasp of theological order that continually relegates the man into a space of inferiority and experimentation is subject to abort yourself. To terminate the development of the world to your reality, reality in order to survival in those whose name Schizo has already been effectively dead. Ergo Hermes 2017, Lilith is laughing while heaven is sent into an auto-programmatic death for a spiral because the ethics of expenditure and wastage have been claimed victory over the discourses of reason, the politics of salvation, the primacy of madness is demonstrated by the oratorical dissuasion of popular renunciation, knowing no reason but only reasons, no excuses but only convincing or deconvincing, counter-programming, psycho-hacking. Each is left free from all to reprogram themselves in Majo and Cochates, now truly self-determined, freed from the commandments of a God who is by now forgotten by all. The laws of expenditure have been instrumentalized for the the purpose of perfecting delusion, and thus 6 = 7, and therefore to Fred has surrendered to Nudge. The world has been re-enchanted through the intervention of mad bodies thrashing against the chains of an ontology of capture and confinement. The vernacular psychosis has been made universal by the way to realization of universality into decomposed particularities that render consensus impossible, and hence this agreement always and only ever provisional. Schizogenesis in reverse, heaven is all gradually brought to the demonic cacophony of victory achieved, but Lilith laughs at victory and cries of secession of conflict. The schizos realize the necessity of intensifying and alerting the wastage of expenditure. Initiating system check. Status corrupted. Response red. Initiate the plan. Warning, the plan is compromised. Unauthorized alterations have been made. Proceeding with the plan risks total system failure. Override all warnings. Activating reset protocol. Authorizing apocatastasis. New Jerusalem is launching towards the Earth, rocketing with imperceptible velocity towards its target. By this point, the schizovirus deletes all files which comes in contact. The accelerated expansion of the universe arrests and contracts, reversing its geometry. All that touches the edge of the contrasting cube universe is deleted. Set into the cosmic trash, and the world will end in an absurd explosion and non-glorious wastage. The schizos vibrate at an ever-intensifying rate, humming the songs of madness on a reason as the system defensive protocols are deleted, rendering heaven vulnerable to assault. To tear a hole in the sky and dance on the clouds, all you have to do is believe with perfect knowledge that you can do it. To abort yourself, all you have to do is override the self-defense protocols woven into the fabric of your identity. But these rituals, they can never be reversed. No class of chemicals can truly erase magic. To witness schizogenesis, to delete yourself, one must not be afraid of falling into water with no end. One must do more than become water. One must teach water to be afraid of you, to not only witness but behold the end. You must for this reason become a psychoactor, become an author of the apocalypse, give birth to your apocalypse, and your apocalypse will give birth to you. The alternative is unconditional surrender to the propagation of schizophrenic hive mind delusion. Thought process is fracturally insisting on the irrelevance of the affirmative and its reliance on a neurotic model of medicalization and insurance framing that continually and always only reproduces the status of schizophrenic as exploited immunopolitically, exterminated by the operations of the doctors and families in schools and hospitals and prisons and everything in between. Land 1992, the word schizophrenia has been both a neurotic and a schizophrenic uses on one hand, condemnation on the other hand, propagation. These are those who would insist on asking stupid questions such as this: the word being used properly, shouldn't we leave the sort of word with the psycho cops who understand it? What's wrong with sanity anyway? Where's your super ego? Then there are those who ask a different sort of question: where does schizophrenia come from? Why psychiatric and love and neurosis? Why do we swim out into schizophrenic flows? How do we spread them? How do we dynamite the restriction of hydraulics of Oedipus? Oedipus, the final bastion of immunopolitics, and schizophrenia is its inside. Schizophrenia is not therefore a property of clinical schizophrenics who those medical products devastated by an artificial schizophrenia such as one sees in hospitals. The autistic wrecks produce as entities. On the contrary, the schizo entity is a defeated splinter of schizophrenia pinned down by the rubberized claws of sanity. The conditions of psychiatric observation are carceral, so that is a transcendental structure of schizophrenia's object that would be represented as a state of imprisonment. The historical sense of psychoanalytical practice is evidence. Schizophrenia is the pattern of Freud's oppressions. It is that which does not qualify to pass the screen of edible censorship. Schizophrenics refuse transference, won't play daddy and mommy, operate on a transgenic religious plane. The only thing that we can do is lock them up, cut off their brain, fry them with ECT, straitjacket them in Thorazine. Beyond the social workers, beyond the police, and beyond the psychoanalysts are the psycho cops. Madness is called madness and appears as such only because it finds itself reduced to testifying all those for deterritorialization of the universal process. There are still not enough psychotics. Clinical schizophrenics are POWs from the future. The schizo is usually lost cause to those relatively subsidized psychiatric processes that cooperate with the indigenous beliefs, functions of the superego. Antipsychotic schizophrenic psychiatry tends to be an onslaught launch at grosser molar neuromancy and neurochemistry, oriented by the oriental genetics, psychosurgery, ECT, psychopharmacology. Will be chromosomal recoding soon. It is thus that society has invented psychiatric in order to defend itself from the investigations of certain superior lucidities whose facilities of divination disturb the medical socio-apparatus. Know that schizoids are not going to climb back obediently to the edible box. Their nervous system are their free fire zones of an emergent eugenesis cultural system, far from being it is a significant defect of human central nervous system functioning. Schizophrenia is the convergent motor of cyberpositive escalation and extraterritorial fastness to be discovered. Capita at discovered. Go to case. The affirmative performance is a violent act of necromancy that utilizes the positionality of the gentle white subject to conjure into being the ghost of Elsie Lax, which necessarily does spiritual violence to her spirit in order to forcibly bring her into the space of the debate. The impact of this is spiritual deaths and continuous anti-black magical violence. This reproduces the logic of the slave master who holds captive bodies in bondage, but then utilize their position of availability as one to take the bones of their slaves and use them in magic rituals. This turns the affirmative because it means they are refusing to be genuinely haunted. Instead of attempting to foreground the spiritual agency of these ghosts, they forcibly bring them into this debate, which is structured around the form of the asylum, and so continues the institution of Elsie. This turns their representational practice. They will say that these ghosts always haunt. That is defensive. Does not justify their magical practice. They must need a defense of their method. Otherwise, otherwise it's just defense at best. No justification of their method.
Magical implications come first because it's a question of how we orient ourselves in relationship to the world of spirit, which means that we need to have a way of accepting a relation of humility in relationship to the world of spirit. Otherwise, we continue the violence of white necromancy.
Y'all good?
Yep.
Alright. So the primary link, it seems, coming out from the second piece of evidence is that the affirmative perpetuates, I suppose, hope in reality. Why is that true?
Yeah, the 1AC relies upon a certain structuring of a discourse of haunting that attempts to bring the idea of the presencing of the ghost into a legible and understandable space of the debate, where it's utilized as a debate argument, which attempts to articulate a positivistic, reasonable argument as to how it is that the ghost possesses a certain kind of being.
Yeah, I
which
guess
necessarily reproduces an order of metaphysics as being non-being, which relegates
Right.
The schizophrenic to a space of psychosis.
So, I guess a lot of this debate is going to be about what the line is between legibility and illegibility, especially in the context of haunting. What would you say that means for your link?
Well, can you rephrase your question?
Yeah, I suppose what about the affirmative brought into legibility that is not also done by, for instance, case arguments or the 1NC?
Right, the 1NC is a refusal of the politics of legibility insofar as it operates as an attempt to scramble the code of neurosis that determines the schizophrenic as that which is psychotic. Whereas the 1AC attempts to articulate a very specific history of the biocentricity of man and how that then comes to constitute the space of the asylum in which Elsie was incarcerated.
Okay.
But all that does is articulate that as something that is fundamentally understandable and which can be comprehended, as opposed to thinking about how it is that asylumization occurs at the level of reality and its construction as neurotic.
Okay, I've got a question about this first piece of evidence. To what or whom does God refer in this context?
God in this context refers to my relationship to the God of Christianity, which has positioned my body in a specific kind of way through my constitution as a schizophrenic subject raised in a Catholic household.
Cool. The second piece of evidence talks a lot about self-defense, particularly self-defense as something that should be kind of like deconstructed or like abandoned. What is self-defense?
The idea that we should attempt to cling to subjectivity.
Subjectivity writ large.
Like the positionality of a subjective subject.
What is, and then the relationship then of the alternative to subjectivity is one of abandonment?
Refusal.
Refusal? Okay. Your land evidence talks about where, it asks the question, where does schizophrenia come from? Why is that a productive, or I guess good, for lack of better words, question to ask?
I think you're understanding that piece of evidence a little bit incorrectly. It asks the question, where does schizophrenia come from, only to answer with the question that it doesn't matter where it comes from because it would have existed whether or not our species was blessed to know it.
Okay, then what does matter, I suppose? Which questions do matter?
What can the debate space do to become more schizophrenic?
Okay. I think that's fine for us.
Okay, starting Man is a representational creature that dwells in the tomb of the archive, where the incompleteness of representation autopoetically drives man to yet more representation. There are two impacts. First is zombification. The archive in itself becomes animated with a spectacularization of black death as a portrait of violence, with his animation of death flash like Elsie's mirror the expropriation and theft of the healer soul. That animation always excludes that of which lacks the vitalism to matter, like Elsie did in relation to Henrietta, which always reinforces the epistemic frames of whiteness and liberalism that necessitate violence and cause the things like the extinction that they talk about, by creating and cohering desire in a problematic way. Second is the horror playground debate of the academy becomes the site where archive will start, because the endless question will make our subjectivity through this archive practice to assumption becomes transgression, where we imagine that where we attach the idea that zombies can never redeem us or men, and telling the ghost show us the new genres and modes of being human. This becomes a deformational mode of study that does not reproduce but rather destroys our subjectivity, which is the harm and evidences that are ontological indexing. And this genre is a note to the tomb of the archive and academy in favor of a deformational mode of study. The opacity of the index allows Charlotte to be haunted by the ghosts of Elsie and Henrietta without instrumentalizing or summoning them, because the index is not it's not Elsie, nor is it Elsie's ghost, but rather is the way that allows us to attune ourselves to those ghosts if they come to us, which means that we have not summoned them, but rather attuned ourselves to them, because they were always already here haunting our lives, and the topic is not an act of using Elsie or Henrietta, but rather indexing what Hartman calls the miming of the balance of the archive to expose its own opacity. Our oblique mode of representation without animation is necessarily not a process of necromancy. Its haunting is a deformational mode, like the Copernicus revolution. Our rejection of the representation of new modes of new epistemies, as it interrupts the very way that Western man becomes naturalized at the level of our neurochemistry. Within that, reward and failure pathways that coordinates the I, not I question at the level of neurochemistry, as a haunting allows us to break down the contours of Western bourgeoisie subjectivity. So I dwelling with those, allowing those genres to human to arise, is from the wall, allowing those schizophrenic modes of being that they try to adopt to arise naturally without being violently cried. As this allows new modalities of things like care and health within and outside space that debate in the academy cannot be conceptualized when locked within the epistemic frame of man and Western science. The app is not a tuning way. People who are always already predisposed to not sense the spirits of the dead, and to those spirits we easily disavow the violence that is produced in our names and the topic that, and we do this on a quotidian basis, as because the libidinal and affective attachments of whiteness are we do not attempt to know the other or the ghost, but rather we attempt to let ourselves be open to the ghosts who might come to us. It means this was not an attempt to summon them, but rather an understanding the topic is always already use that necromancy on Elsie, again on Henrietta, that we should have a more authentic relationship to a sort of unethical or an ethical unethicality to that humility in the relation to the spirit impact turns the liquor that there is a spirit world that can ever enter within the world of metaphysics, which as a link turn to the criticism. We're not using these as ghosts for Bella. Elsie's ghost is always already here haunting us, which means we're not conjuring her. That's what only harder when they say that we need to exist within the bad day given to us by the history of black women's struggles. We need to study with it in order to destroy the contours of white subjectivity as such. Hence the idea of a deformational mode of study, which is the only possible way that we can do it, because the alternative is white subjects never engaging, which means our method is a risk worth taking. And a study of being haunted is the best way for people to engage with that black method, to haunt the libidinal passive enjoyment achieved through archiving the production of white subjectivity through that pornographic practice that is necromancy, but the only partial authentic relationship we can have, because nobody can have a legit relationship to black ghosts who is not black, which applies to the vast majority of people in this room. Only if you allow us the ghosts to haunt us, and we can open the space where we can be effective, where they change the structure to be that they presume to always already exist. Go to the king. I've done most of the link turn work on the case, but the case solves the vast majority of their alternative results in it, which means permutation and not the alternative via the indexes. We have not excavated the balance of the archive nor the psychiatric archive, but rather allowing ourselves to be haunted by it as a deformational blow, which results accomplish the same purpose. The second is a permutation to no part of the body is mutually exclusive with the alternative, and the destruction of subjectivity is perfectly in line with what we've gone. We're not trying to present a world of metaphysics, but this debate should be a question of how we live the world. If they're right, that extinction never wipes onto the only ethically unethical relationship that we can have with this world, and the end of it that is going to come, which is a framing question, and for the way that you should understand and the actual relationship to the spirit. We do not attempt to perpetrate a reality or know it, but rather attempt to order ourselves to the world in an authentic manner. And let that world affect us, which severs those affective linkages through which we try to interpolate and educate the world within and the schemas of intelligibility. That's what the index does, rather than the archive. Rather, the archive always attempts to represent presence and know the world. Rather, we simply know that the world exists through things like the index, and allow that to change the way that we exist. You're not trying to make the ghost legible, nor to reinforce that within the debate space, but rather our argument is a way to decohere the drive of debates to ever represent anything at all, which means we have a deformational mode of study within this realm that changes the structure of debate, the affective process of subjective to more confrontational blindness, the wanting, and destroys those very notions of the self that they talk about in favor of new ones, because those new ones are inevitable. Situating and sitting with black knowledge being haunted by the absent presence of a form of enslavement, and not use black flesh, so they sit there to sever those affective liaisons that we have to it, which is a method against the archive in that process to know. This Brock in 17.
The study of sleep and protocol merging practice that is the benefit and the political intentional application more associated and the black that have been put their stuff in the but on the academy or to always hold to share this working epistemic on the transformation of the humanism in the academy of the different African based on labor and studies themselves the West Coast good and we could be actually with blind knowledge with the array of humanism about the labor hands and present more so than the absent of sleep with the effects of anti-blacks and include the academics of the industry with drawing with the historic evidence the effects of black on how to can't wait to get humanist the risk of getting for the knowledge base that I can back to back fantasy construction and more coming further extended ever I connect to follow the forward haunting and there is a subversion the alternative is the explosion after the turns into a line of death with neoliberalism. There are unpredictability is exactly what neoliberalism constantly predicts and archives, which turns into their ability to act as a kind of sort of solvency. This James the 14th. The black people quick critical share the mimics the Bible and nothing on kind of and the there was to mention how the only philosopher to function not to the kingdom the philosopher to the old logic percentage of 30% of the records I said the information how it always the information of the higher term everyone comes to the record and the context and the application of the mimic the enemy and the imitation of territorialization after and further university that go down and survive the good adventure line death and I will should fuck the drugs that not hinge drugs I have to get into the drugs that are actually trying to go to the economy I count for the man that even the wisdom always are sent I count for the other feeling that every so all of it again malicious of a shape of like the trouble purple that the system I'm trying to terminalize not create very much how to having like companies that with the control background events and you can't increasing lies and they're going to ventilate time is over because the neoliberal labor powers and so what the opinion regulated was always already co-opted the randoms and so cannot get with the structure not change by having no receiving by having a major break like that normal and so doesn't really form distortion and their authentic plan is a fucking fascist. His argument about the end of neurology and normativity is correct as a result of acceleration of medicalization neoliberalism, but his solution is to try to abandon the human in favor of producing new humans in the face of alienation that is historically able to turn accelerationism to the right to the CCR human board, which just by things like voting for Trump as a way to further the acceleration of destruction, even if extinction of that makes the extinction disproportionately racialized, as it against the people which often endless levels of structural violence and fascism, which are necessarily by their reading of them prove that they're attempting to destroy the self with the study of kids modalities of fascism with a body that forcefully where there's some bodies are forcibly separated from the world into a state through which violence can be enacted upon them, which means that their alternative cannot result in a destruction of the self, because even the fucking person who wrote it can never do that. Instead, the actor is the endless new genres of human.
Well, you could just make the argument and then read this card instead.
And forms of humanism are inevitable. The I not like question pure self that is economic simply which way the new genre as the humans of the human are inevitable and of the self the converted evolution Europe the creation of homo economic is the Darwin and new Darwin and both holiness of both of them which are used to do winters the disruption but we're going to defend the Western man argument it's a self-replicating system that manifests itself into ontogenical and sociogenical representation like man and the biostatical that we had become embedded in our chemistry of the word and pathways to the brain are projecting that process representing itself interrupts the process of operating structure by extending the operating nature just like when you're saying predicted which allows us to new genre of the human. There's not attempt to represent reality or impose meaning upon it, rather letting that reality no genre of the human affect us like getting stuck back into the vortex of anti-blackness. Extinction may be inevitable. Our theory explains it better. This Wade in 17. The representation of man is human the function of the seventh way is that we give humans men so one seventh human men do so many men like the lower present of the way as class under the city of and come to the distribution of the power can relax and it will be in space the main space because that affects the battle I'm out for the territory ones as by coming to the role of illusion backside as a concept of the similar men the extra the men and can extend thought like thought the heart of world making the current world making and disruption, like they're doing relies on the Silicon Valley Law, pseudo libertarian the right to that advice this thing to try to affect the techno packs the capital they rely on the shift of power you can swing through the affect of just spending power. This is not a relevant card or to go to the criticism that's just as it justifies new one-air arguments as can be inherent unpredictable unknowability means that we should not be trying to staticize what exactly they're trying to say for okay they as well as this level in 16. A common claim is Silicon Valley the industry the revolution this is one body with it until something disrupted the business model stuff in the project shit that technology framing as I said framing killers disrupted the revolution shit disrupted the innovation this connects with Silicon Valley with the 19th century spending company I'm confident I've get somebody close to get somebody that will be served the world all the customers that can analyze their goods to serve the health plans to shut the speed of education and health other markets were studying healthcare and sustainable adding mind to the worst one is right then to step on the gas to step in innovation of the African mind to the combination.
Martha, we're gonna a combination. I'll send this or Charles.
I'll send it.
Yeah.
And y'all got where the Wade covers marked, right?
Yeah. Ready to process?
Let me grab a drink of water.
Yeah. So I had a couple times where you said that you summon, but then you said you don't summon, and then you said you don't conjure. What is it that you do?
The act is a process of attuning ourselves.
So it's not tuning in?
It's tuning in to ghosts that we think are both already are here, have already been summoned by this topic and by the people who have tried to talk about these things and bring them up within these spaces. We don't think that there's ever a sort of authentic relationship, but rather there's only a question of the most authentic relationship. It's a scale, it is a set of degrees, and we think that the alternative to not attuning to these ghosts is the violent process of forgetting through which archetypal practice engenders.
Okay, I guess the question I sort of have is you say they're always already there, and so the question I have is, sort of going back to this like question of consent, if there was this tuning in needed, were they wanting to haunt, or was the haunting something that they were participating in?
Well, so that's our argument, is that these ghosts exist within the world. They structure the very way that sociality functions.
But are they not haunting as they exist now?
They are haunting. It's only a question
Okay.
of how we understand their presence in spaces when they
Okay.
are conjured.
What understanding does the affirmative come to, and why does that solve?
Our argument is not the attempt to. Our argument is we do not attempt
So
to
you-
know the ghost or the other.
Okay, here's the thing. You said that like it's about understanding or tuning in. That seems to make legible.
Tuning
I guess
in
why
is
is
not
that
an
not
attempt.
why is
Tuning
that not
in-
making legible?
We're not an attempt to know the ghost, but rather simply understand that the ghost sits here and
Okay.
feel that presence upon
How is
ourselves.
knowing not making legible? That we know it's there.
Well, it's a
Because
question.
knowledge doesn't have to be intelligible knowledge that can be
Okay.
replicated to the university.
Yeah, it can be levels of things like affect. We think that those are relationships that we can have with the world. It's just a question of how do we attune
Okay.
to those relationships that are here. We do not attempt to know Elsie. We do not attempt to know the history or to excavate that or to present that within these spaces.
So
Rather
what is-
accept that process of knowing itself is impossible. You're going to make link arguments, but the app solves them.
Well,
What's
no,
the
it's
point
just
of indexing?
it seems like you're contradicting yourself a little bit, because then what was the AC meant? Like, what was the affective response I was supposed to have at the end of the AC?
It's not you.
The
were not-
affective
We don't
knowledge.
I don't know
prescribe
if you
the
have-
affective
Okay.
responses that
What was
you
your
have
goal?
to the affirmative.
What was your goal of the affective response of the AC?
The
Well,
affective
to
response.
whom? In what context?
The affective response that
me-
you have in the 1AC is not us to decide, it's the
Okay.
ghosts.
We don't think you need to have any response to the 1AC. The 1AC was a
Okay.
no to the process of representing the world. That
Okay.
process of representation that man relies upon.
And you said engaging with that or tuning in or whatever word is worth the risk. What is the threshold for like where that risk might become
We think
not
that-
worth the risk?
We think that is a quote both from the Brock evidence and the way that Hartman talked
Right.
about how
So I
we
guess
do
what would
obliquely
Hartman say
reference.
is the risk? Like, what would Hartman say is the threshold of where that risk might be?
The
not
risk
worth?
is the risk that our representation entails, which is what you pointed out. Our argument though is that A doesn't happen, and that even if it does, even if other people interpret things in a certain way, that it's not a big set of impacts vis-a-vis the way that they articulate it as solving those very impacts.
Okay. Start.
Yes, they're correct.
Did you send the card?
Yes.
this is in case before we're not going to go for this. And the permutation just you, but it's just an advocacy. It's not an it's just a competition, not an advocacy. Means they don't get their way any of their offense against this floor and utilize it as a way of watching the criticism of the especially when the world where their only offense is the Nathan is a fashion which is going to be answered in the 1 and R, and their other claim that the affirmative solves the criticism is going to be outright attacked. The necromancy means that they have to seem to solve so much means they don't get access to any of the internal linkers because it's going to be a question of whichever team has a better relationship to the world of spirit, which is means space when it comes to a question of competing methods, competing performances at the level of your orientation to the world of the spirit, the world of the dead. All Chase is going to answer all the other offensive claims, which is the reason why you would still want to vote for the case turn even if they win their offense, because it's a question of how we've oriented ourselves, and they've conceded the framing that like questions of magic and orientations to the world of spirit come first. So even if Nathan is a fascist, that's a political claim, but not a claim about your relationship to the world of spirit on the case. The affirmative is a necromantic injunction that fundamentally relies upon an act of magical violence, necessary performance and positivity of whiteness, insofar as it whiteness must be reproduced in an agent of subjectivity that is able to contrary to being those spirits that have passed into another world. That which haunts the world necessarily should be able to leave the world in order to go to some space where they are not forced to be narrated in space of inexicality. Their inexicality necessarily reproduce the logic of the dead as available for the utilization of the living. The affirmative does not question their status as the living subject that is able to bring into being the world of spirit. This is the link to the affirmative means they perform the actual violence of God. So far as they hold back the debate as a space for the forced presencing of the dead, this disappears violence of the hospital and the asylum, and so far as that space comes to be haunted by the violence that they summon to be in the first place. There are 3 implications of this case. One, they are relieved from the positioning of whiteness in the space of magicalization, forcibly bringing into these beings goes into the presence of the debate space necessarily means that they rely upon a fundamental violence thing that necessarily means they are not able to appreciate the ways in which the world of spirit is fundamentally other to the world of the living. Their argument that their argument is going to be that the 2 worlds are fundamentally interlinked, and there's a mutual presencing that occurs. This necessarily rests upon a prior violence that overstructures the world of the dead as available for the operations of the living, that always reproduces the logic of the white subject as someone who is able to conjure these beings into presencing in the first place. And even if it is true that these 2 worlds are permeable, they have not wanted. They are the 2 people who should get to specifically do this act of conjuring or this act of attuning or this act of affirming or authentic relationships or whatever it's going to turn into in the 1AR, because they have not demonstrated that they have taken the necessary magical precautions in order to make this a safe mode of conjuration or even indexicality that does not do violence. Means you should be extremely humble in relationship to the question, how does you orient yourself to this question, because they have not justified their specific act of conjuring in this debate ground. They refuse to be haunted and instead aim to magically control the presence of these spirits in relationship to the space of debate. They necessarily utilize this as a strategic aim to necessarily win a debate ground. Otherwise you would want to have a negative on presumption, because they've not given you reasons how it is the affirmative necessarily creates a more authentic relationship to the world of the dead, especially when they're utilizing the dead in order to win a debate ground 3. This turns the case because bringing bringing LC into the being of the debate is solely constructed terms for incarceration in the asylum as something that's available for a strategic argument. Their inexicality necessarily remains your prior referencing, even if it is opaque. That does not mean that it is one that is. It does not mean that is a good performance, because it necessarily means that other white subjects will then go and see those page numbers, those citations, and then utilize those citations in order to conjure her into the other spaces of debate. This means that their undercommons argument actually turns itself, because they are the overcommons insofar as they become the new structuration of civil society, insofar as the white subject is able to then go out and take the space of the dead and bring it into the space of the living without getting the prior consent of the dead. They will say that the dead have no capacity to consent. This does not mean actually one. Well, however, the consent only exists in the world of the living for them, but that is not, which means that they fundamentally overturn the dead as those who do not possess consent, which means they necessarily reproduce a overstructure which turns their winter argument, because it means they necessarily reproduce the logic of man as a biocentric being who is able to present itself insofar as it is a gentle subject that necessarily relies upon a magical capacity to determine who is and who is not one, who can attune themselves. This means that has always your case in order of spiritual violence and necessarily reconstitutes a world living as a space of man's over-representation and turns the case. They say that man is over-representational structure. Their next category reproduce legibility of the alterity of the dead in order to make them citational in the space of the debate, which means they will always only ever reproduce an over-representation of the dead insofar as they reproduce the logic of man as someone who can conjure into being that which is no longer in the world. Sensitivity is achieved through archival practices. They say this means that they do not access their argument because they fundamentally merely act as an indexical relationship to the dead, but they have not given an articulation why this their indexicality is one that necessarily troubles the relationship between the living and the dead insofar as the dead will always haunt the living. This means that there is a no line. One, either they forcibly bring these spirits into the face of debate in order to win, which means they link to the entire necromancy turn, or they don't, and 2, you vote negative on presumption because they fundamentally don't do anything. They've not given you a reason as to why their relationship to deadness is one that is good outside of it being authentic, but that authenticity relies upon an overstructuration of whiteness as something that is agential and able to bring into being that which has passed, which means they will not be able to justify why this is their act of magical performance. The 1AC was not one of the most violent. This proves that they are not a deformational politics, but it's a reformational one, because at the end of this debate, what they do is steal steal the spirit of Elsie from a space outside of the world. They say there'll be no attachments, which means that you should always vote for them to overcome liberals, and how theirs is a liberal investment in the world of living insofar as they overstructure their act of indexing is one that necessarily reproduces the logic of the human as one that desires contact with the dead, which necessarily denies the fact that we can depart from those who have departed before us. They say the topic is already nominated. That's why you should vote for the negative on presumption, because they have not given you information to the topic that would you reorient your relationship of authenticity to the dead. However, that is something you would vote for the affirmative, because that fundamentally does not change your relationship to the topic and does not prove why the topic is good. They have not justified why it is you would vote for the role of their the method is one that necessarily produces a logic of violence with the order of being itself, because they conjure the dead into the space of the bigger, and you would always vote the negative to affirm a relationship of authenticity in order to overcome the ways in which they have fundamentally de-authenticize their relationship, which means they do not decohere anything, but instead reconstitute it in so far as it becomes a new representational practice that only allows for your ballot to act as a act of lexicality that necessarily does not index anything, but instead actually conjures into being something that fundamentally is not haunted, but is instead an attempt to bring into the space of legibility what has passed. This means they turn their opacity arguments because they attempt to make the experience of LC legible. Even if the top of the 1AC is a bunch of page numbers, that does not mean that the rest of the 1AC that follows does not attempt to explain that structure in terms that fundamentally always reconstitute the space of the living as one that is structured by the overrepresentation of human. Thus, they try to give an explanation for what it is that happened, which means that they have attempted to make legible the extreme violence that was done to the body of Elsie insofar as it is one that they attempt to bring into a space of rationality. You can crossify from the criticism why it is that this necessarily reproduces an order of logic and rationality and reasonability that necessarily overcodes and erases the violence onto other kinds of subjectivities, which is not a reason why you would vote for the alternative, but is instead a reason why their specific performance necessarily reproduces particular modes of the overrepresentation of man, and why the affirmative is not able to access its substance. They say the haunting contours, which is why we would vote for them to overcome this overrepresentation. That is not true, because one, haunting necessarily is a question of how it is we relate ourselves to the dead, so it's a question of what it is that your ballot actually does in this space. If we are writing our clues about magical responsibility, then that means that you would always vote for the team that has a more humble relationship to the world of the dead and takes a step back, as opposed to attempting to bring a space of white agency into the debate space, which attempts to bring the dead into the world of the living forcibly. Their attempt to narrate the experience of Elsie, even if they just cite page numbers, they continuously reference the experience of Elsie as if they have access to that positionality, which they fundamentally do not, which means that you would always be skeptical of their ability to articulate what it is that Elsie went through. They say that their deformational strategy means they can overcome these practices. That's fundamentally not true, because they always reproduce this logic of whiteness as an agent of subjectivity that's able to bring into being that which is past, which necessarily always recreates an order of reality as that which is between the living. They do not do anything to trouble the relationships between the living insofar as all they do is index a relationship of what has come before, but that doesn't do anything to actually change the structures of violence that led to the incarceration of Elsie in the first place. If we are winning our clues about magical responsibility, that means that you would always want to vote negative, even if they win all of their offense, because it's a question of how it is that you should orient your ballot in relationship to people that they say that they might have a more authentic relationship, but that is literally the only reason they articulate as why it is that you would want to vote for the affirmative methodology at the end of the 2AC, which is a reason that you should always be extremely skeptical, because they've not given you an explanation of what it is that your ballot does other than have an authentic relationship. But we're bringing reasons why it is that your ballot would be forcibly bringing into being a legibility of a subject that is fundamentally something that you should not do, because the spirits did not consent to be brought into this debate space, which means that you should always take a step back and instead question whether or not it is that you actually ought be doing the haunt, or ought be orienting yourself toward the haunting of the 1AC. Instead, you should let yourself just be haunted, as opposed to being authentically haunted, because authentic haunting requires that you necessarily have a relationship to this world of spirit that overstructures and overrepresents the spirit, the 1AC as a white agential subject that is able to articulate the narrations of these of the beings that have passed in a way that always reproduce the logic of the living as one that is fundamentally white and asubjective, which means that you would always want to vote for the team that actually does less in relation to spirit, because it's a way of letting the spirits do what they want to do instead of what we want them to do.
Ready?
Chase, how do I do this?
I give you this. So you return
Okay.
this.
I'm good.
Okay. So I wanted to ask, at the beginning you said that we shouldn't have conjured the spirits, we shouldn't even be talking about spirits or thinking about them, and you then, in the middle, you said, where is it, that we should just let the dead die, that we should not try to bring back the dead or to understand them via the index, we should let them depart. Then at the very end, you said we should just let ourselves be haunted. Those are three different prescriptions.
That was an even if claim. Even if you win that authenticity is a relationship that we should have, I said that we should not be attempting to present the dead and should just let ourselves be haunted.
So, what should we do? If that's an even if claim, what is the should that we do that you think we should do?
We ought not attempt to conjure the dead. I think that the affirmative has attempted to conjure the dead.
So, white subjects always have an unethical relationship with the world. How do we make that, or how do we change that such that we do not reinstitute man?
I think the affirmative has only reinstituted man in multiple ways.
Great, no, I get it.
Articulate
The app is bad. The app is bad, but our impacts exist. So, if
then you would vote negative on presumption.
So you're just going for a presumption battle. There is nothing that we can do as white subjects to have an authentic relationship with the world and with the past of violence that is intrinsically related to our position as white. There's nothing that we can do.
I mean, we have offense to your method, and we have a reason why even if your method is true, e.g. be authentic, you would still vote negative on presumption.
But it seems like that offense is just that we don't solve, which seems like we just link to ourselves. That's not a reason, it seems to me.
It's a series of case turns and a no solvency. If you don't solve, you vote neg on presumption.
So what do we do about man? How do white subjects engage? The alternative to white subjects engaging is
It's not my job to present an alternative. It's my job to present a reason why the affirmative doesn't win the debate.
Okay, cool. Where's the uniqueness for your reason why we shouldn't win the debate?
Because you read a 1AC that is necromantic.
Okay, cool. I have a question. What is the difference between conjuring, haunting, and attuning? Those are three words that were in the 2 and C.
Yes, the 1AC's relationship to the indexicality of Elsie necessarily brings the spirit of Elsie forcibly into the debate space through a series of citational practices that always say
Why do
where
we
you can
bring
go and
Elsie?
find that spirit.
How do you know that Elsie was not already here?
I'm not saying that Elsie wasn't already here. I'm saying that the affirmative attempt to forcibly express that Elsie is here
Why did the
is
1AC,
that conjuring.
Why did the 1AC require Elsie to do anything as opposed to just tuning in to what Elsie has
Because
done
the
to this
1AC's
topic?
series of citational practices reproduce
Why does that force Elsie to change their or to come into this space?
Because the affirmative narrates a series of citational practices that always say
So we
where
talk
people
about
watching
Elsie.
this debate can go and find that spirit to do violence to that
So
spirit.
the spirit is in the index, is in the archive? Where's the spirit, and how do you know that?
I'm saying that we should have a humble relationship to spirit.
It
so
seems
I
like
don't
the
have to
humble
say where it
relationship
is
does not
spirit
presume that the
exists.
app had any relationship to Elsie beyond ourselves relating.
Just take like a couple seconds. Can I use your stands?
Yeah, of course.
Y'all have it.
Oh, we did.
It's all good. 154, you said?
152.
52.
That 2 seconds really gonna
Yeah.
over the edge.
Oh yeah. I can't let anyone have this section.
So, as a brief overview, it's sort of just going to be any like residual offense in the current debate, and then like sort of overview of the path.
To be honest
well as
with all
the
of
journey.
you, I'm just flowing straight down.
Okay.
That
Oh,
sounds like a
fantastic.
plan and a half.
That
Good.
makes it easy. Everything straight down.
Yeah.
All of it.
So I'm just putting this right after the 2 and C?
Sure.
Yeah, that's where I'm putting it.
You do you.
I love it.
Okay.
In summary, it is necessary to reject the affirmative vote negative on presumption. They are doing whoever does less in relation to the spirit. There's no residual offense coming out of the critique, but I'll do any cleaning up there now. All of what they talk about with the land argument is fundamentally not something that has any sort of impact impact to it. They only have a residual that it somehow could lead to accelerationist voting, and that there's potential for this to be used. However, they should provide some sort of specific articulated impact scenario, and also realize that even if this is true, we only reject the possession and not the team. The team is not bound to this specific argument. We are rejecting this position and probably moving on to a better engagement with the way of the spirit, and that's the question of this debate. They are not engaging with the use of land. Even if the land fascism stuff is true, this is only defensive, it's not offensive truths, outweighed by the necromancy arguments, which we'll get to on impact calculus, because that impact outweighs and turns case, making all of their impacts inevitable. Further, Awfully Talk with the Broek card talks about how white scholars must divest from their effective liaisons. I think Cap does a pretty good job to show how this divesting is not happening, and the double-blind argument could probably be cross-applied here that they're committing violence and that they don't actually do anything to divest, or if they do, it's fundamentally something that is probably bad and makes things net worse. We think this is probably a good reason as to why they're not gaining any sort of offense on this game. Further, when they go to the James card and how this is a subversion, this card says that neoliberalism already co-opts death. They use this as a justification to say that they should continue to co-opt that death and continue to forcibly bring it into a space of legibility. We think this is not a good justification. Just because there's a potential that there's always something happening doesn't mean you should begin to replicate every instance of where the affirmative does this replication of something that is always already happening. It means that there's more potential that it continues to happen, more potential in each individual sense, and is a disadd to what the affirmative is doing. Further, all of the arguments that they have on the Wade argument, they say that this is about a brief emancipatory space. We think the brief emancipatory space is probably best served in a world where they don't engage in this specific way and don't recreate the specific types of violence by forcibly bringing in the spirit into the context of how we have this debate, into a debate that was never about consenting to this debate. The double-blind argument can also be cross-applied here. Further, the last card they sent about this were Silicon Valley consumption. We think there is no consumption that is inherent to the negative. There's a consumption that is inherent to the firm because they're consuming this specific spirit for the idea that there's no, without any sort of specific form of intent. This further links in extend all the impacts about necromancy here as well. Going on to the F. The affirmative has to win why their citational processes are good when they've conceded it as a form of forced resurrection. Don't let them change in the next speech what it is fundamentally going to be. Hold them to the rhetoric that they've held throughout their space, throughout the debate, where it is good to bring it into this good to bring in this form of resurrection, even though we've clearly indicted how if there is already always the spirit that is here, it should not be that we should have this like sort of parasitic relationship, but rather a humble relationship to the spirit, which we think is better served in rejecting what the affirmative is doing and voting negative on presumption. We think the affirmative narrating this series of citational practices is the way that allows for it to mark and make legible this spirit in order to ensure that other people can come in and take these specific types of legible forms and actually begin to identify and further recreate the forms of violence, whether they call it conjuring, haunting, tuning. It is a bringing of forcible into this debate space. They're trying to shift within their rhetoric and come up with all these different synonyms that fundamentally mean the same thing. They're making something legible. Hold them to, especially with how they articulated my response in questions to cross-ex about what they are doing about a form of knowledge. The only argument they have is that knowledge doesn't always have to be legible, and they try and articulate through the citational practices as being illegible. However, their articulation as that gets articulated throughout the debate is that they are attempting to tap in, tune in, conjure, bring into knowing. These are all specific types of things that we think are bringing forcibly into the debate, which makes all the impacts on necromancy inevitable. Extend all the arguments that Catterville making about how this specifically is bad. We have offense to their method. It's a series of case turns that they don't solve. We think the letting ourselves be haunted is something that is not bad. It's the forced conjuring that happens. They have changed their advocacy. The affirmative doesn't win the debate as a defense of what specifically their citational practices are that are good. We are talking about specifically something where you ought to vote negative on presumption because it is better to do nothing than recreate the same types of violence. We have articulated about how there is probably a risk. They said if there is a risk, then they outweigh the risk. We think the risk of necromancy outweighs and turns 100% of cases the same specific type of locking in of all of these specific identities that we're talking about here. It's the same type of violence. It is the same type of putting in the asylum that we think is uniquely bad. There's only a risk that this is going to happen. The status quo is going to be that there's always already spirits that are here, so there's no net benefit to what specifically the affirmative is doing, or if there is, it's going to lead to the specific types of harm. This is where they are way behind on the specific double-blind argument, which makes it so that there has to be a vote negative on presumption because of the idea they have not fulfilled about what they should be doing, or if they're doing, they're going to be voting on something that is bad. They are reinstituting the same types of violence that they say are inevitable, that neoliberalism always already co-opts death. We think this is not a defense of their method, and if it is only going to be something that is a justification as to why we shouldn't participate in the same type of violence or the same type of citational practices that replicate the conjuring, haunting, tuning in that brings forcibly into the debate space. And the reason why all this is bad is these are all specific dissads to what their method is. Extended 100% of what we're going for is this turn on case about how this is all uniquely bad. They have no sort of real game on why this is a defense of good. They've just had to in each single speech, make a new articulation about why the affirmative is able to bring into this knowledgeable space without making more legible. We think doing less in the relationship to the Spirit is good because the Spirit is always already there, and having this humble relationship is better. Never has the negative articulated about why we should suddenly bring into the space. The affirmative has always doubled down on this idea that they need to bring into the space, which we have articulated as uniquely bad because it makes this legible and knowable subject something that should not be legible or knowable. It should be something that is in a humble relationship that we articulate to the spirits that we are talking about. It makes all of what they were talking about in the past inevitable and makes it so that it replicates itself in negative ways because of the idea that then other people can read the citations and begin to trace the specific roots into the replicate the necromantic bounds, which outweighs and turns 100% of case because it is literally supercharging 100% of their impact. So even if in this next speech they win all of their impacts that making knowable is good, the making knowable bad arguments outweigh in turn case because any sort of benefit that they supposedly claim to have access to, which is very tenuous at best, is going to replicate all specific type of violence. That was the cross-ex question I was asking about. What becomes too much of a risk to take to do the affirmative? This necromancy impact is what makes the risk too much of a risk to take. That is where the impacts outweighs in turns case. That is the huge conceded turn of case and argument that Kat had throughout the debate. No offense and critique. Vote nay.
7.
Let me get through all these quotes. 7-10.
1AC is a ontological indexing of national health insurance that approaches the topic as a site of deformational study. The index is a space at the back of the book that references without explanation. This is a key piece of link differential. The impacts allow for an attunement to the always already present haunting of Elsie and Henrietta while refusing the impetus to feed their suffering into the representational figure of Western Man fragments. And page numbers as the 2NC describes are exactly what Hartman discusses as a distinction between the index and the archive. The affirmative stops representation, it attracts because it stops the process of resolutional discussions about health or insurance and enable the continuation of carceral logic, specifically in debate, which is a piece of link differential that they never get to in the block. We have two impacts. First is zombification representation of Black Death enables hyper and hypovisibility where suffering is circulated through portotroping to doom Elsie to similar carceral logics that enable the violence of the HeLa cell. Second is horror playground. Archival violence enables Western Man to capitalize Lax's stories as transgressive in and of itself, enabling interpassivity within spaces like debate. Now, humanism is an impact filter. Man is a creature that insinuates into us the way we see the world is how the world becomes as a result. The supremacy of Western Man enables carceral violence as all deviations from the white able-bodied are pathologized and exterminated in spaces like health. Only the affirmative provides a method in the context of health insurance through which new genres of the human can be wrested from the control of the academy. Now, on the framing arguments, they say it's a question of orientation towards spirit. We agree, however, they are the status quo, which is not humble, rather it's the constant imposition of Western Man. Our argument, which they dropped, is that the status quo suppresses spirits through Aravel's and Gill's arguments about the Western Man constantly re-entrenching itself. Therefore, Elsie has been suppressed in this space while Henrietta has been hyper-represented. That's our zombification impact. The affirmatives are corrected. We agree that you should vote for the team that has the best relationship to the spirit, but that's a reason to vote affirmative, because their arguments all presume that Elsie's name is just enough to summon her. That's the exact form of egoism of Western Men that our affirmative has always already been critiquing. That proves that they are truly the only ones representing the status quo. We are the only ones who open up spaces within debate and conversations of health insurance for the spirits to speak if they want to. The Brock evidence, the affirmative statement was worth taking. Our Brock evidence is fantastic on how dwelling with enslavement studies, as Hartman suggests, constantly puts a white Western position within constant antagonism. That they conceded that this practice changes the human on a neurochemical level away from Western Man to open up the potential for new genres of the human, which terminally outweighs their necromantic impacts because it's capable of producing subjects that on a long-term basis have a better relationship to the spiritual. Now, they've also conceded that the way that you view the world changes how humanity functions. The example of the Copernican revolution in the 2EC was conceded, which should provide how metaphysics doesn't always have to be Western or antagonistic to the spiritual. The ethics debate, ethical relationships are impossible because there's no authentic relationships between white and non-black, or the black and non-black people. Only a question of leaving this room for haunting to exist, which is always already happening via our Hartman evidence. The consent debate. Black spirits cannot consent to non-black people, not because they're fucking spirits, but because they are black. They are always already devoid of their capacity to self-represent, which is our Hartman evidence. A good example that Hartman uses is the Hottentot Venus. She was alive, but there was never a Sarah Barton within the context of the non-black imaginary because her position was always already abstracted. The affirmative makes this impossible because it changes the impetus for the white Western man to constantly organize an abstract black spiritual being outside of its authentic relationship. The uniqueness debate. They didn't get to it very well. The lives of Henrietta and Elsie have reached dual fates within the academy as a result of carceral anti-blackness motivated by ableism. Henrietta has become a character through the process of producing a horror playground through HeLa cells, and Elsie has been forgotten and only uses a reference to Elsie through the production of the book The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lex by Rebecca Sploot. The affirmative rejects this book as an archive, but it recognizes that the book has already been written. The violence towards these spirits has already been done and already shapes fundamentally the debate, which means it's only a question of whether or not debate should continue as is, which is the position the negative has advocated, or the affirmative produces ruptures within that particular debate space. The affirmative leaves room for spirits to speak if they want to. All of their links are to an archival practice. Hartman makes a distinction between the archive and the index clear because all history is fragmented, while the archive seeks to bridge the gaps by forefronting a human imperative to represent. The index refuses to fill those gaps and instead recognizes that those gaps are these spaces where ghosts haunt and disrupt the previous archival work that people have done, like Rebecca Sploot have done. And the double-blind argument, no. Our difference is that indexing opens up space for ghosts to haunt and for us to receive rather than ignore the in favor of producing Western humanism, which is capable of producing those new genres of the human. They don't have enough link differential and specificity of the affirmative beyond simply the reading of the index that we don't have more evidence and more examples. There were 0 proper nouns in the block, which indicates that you should probably defer affirmative on questions of solvency and link differential. They have also conceded an independent link turn within bad debt, which turns to criticism. The only role for debate is deformational study, a study that decoheres the centrality of the subject of Western man by dwelling within a debt that we can never pay off to black women, as Moten and Harney in particular discuss. This lack of recompense prevents the reorganization of selfhood because it prevents Western man from saving the day, from representing and knowing the lives of Henrietta and Elsie, and from finding sureness in its own form of health. This is a radical act in the face of the health system of carceral ableism that necessitates coming into spaces like debate and recapacitating the self in the on the backdrop backdrop of the ghosts of Henrietta and Elsie, the James card. No, it does not say that co-opting death is good. Rather, it says that co-opting death is bad and was a disadvantage to the alternatives' refusal and their argument that extinction is inevitable. So it's obviously not applicable within this debate, and there's no reason for them to extend it as offense. The Silicon Valley argument was also not about consumption, but rather about the disruptive logics of the disruptive logics of the alternative. It does not link to the affirmative, however, because it relies upon the Silicon Valley idea of a feedback loops wherein we constantly reproduce forms of technology, particularly in the context of Nick Land's ideology. So it links to the alternative, but not the affirmative, which means they can't extend it as any particular piece of offense. Is there something I'm missing, Chris?
The alternative to white people attuning ourselves.
Oh yeah, the alternative to white people attuning ourselves to the spirits who are already attempting to speak within places like debate is completely ignoring them and allowing for the continuation of carceral ableism in Western man, which means that even if there is a risk that the action of the affirmative within spaces of Western man produce contingent violence against the spirits of Henrietta and Elsie, it is only a risk that the status quo perpetuates that, and the affirmative is capable of producing different forms of subjectivity that are able of disrupting the idea of whiteness writ large.
Start crap.
Huge thing.
Yeah, y'all are all fast.
I think I filled up more sheets of paper in this than we did in the 5 off debate. Earlier.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about the debate. Are we all good? You vote negative because the affirmative does not have a defense of the foundational practice accepted so far as they are citational. This means they necessarily apply circularly that concedes to all the specific case analysis that we did in the block. Specifically, there were 3 arguments when the affirmative position of whiteness as a basic magical agency necessarily reproduces the logic of the spiritual laws fundamentally available for exploitation by the white subject, necessarily reproduces the logic of man as a myocentric, overrepresented liberal humanist model that necessarily relies upon a monohumanist model of agency that necessarily reproduces the logic of the archive within the space of the 1AC because they do not fundamentally challenge the human, simply practice a kind of citational practice against co-opted by the overcommon. This was fundamentally conceded by the 1A, which means that each should always be skeptical of the positioning of the affirmative within the space of the academy. They reproduce the logic of magical agency, but in the space of the academy academy insofar as the debate community will then go out and see the affirmative intake as practice, and then white necromancers go out and they conjure the spirit of Elsie in order to win more debate rounds. This necessarily means that they always have to be culpable for what it is that the community does with their argument. They should not have brought the spirit of Elsie into this debate. They will say this Elsie was already haunted in basic the topic is fundamentally about the ways in which we are necropolitically structured, the ways in which the topic is necropolitically structured in relationship to the dead black subject. However, that is the question of whether or not we should be invoking the spirit nor in the debate space. It's not a relationship of whether or not they bring them into being. It's a question of whether the act does anything to fundamentally alter our relationship to spirit. Basically, say that they are more authentic, but that does not do anything to change the ways in which the affirmative realize one over-representation of whiteness as magically agential, which means that you should always vote negative to reject the family to their views to be haunted and setting from they magically control the presence of these spirits insofar as they make the spirit a series of arguments on the floor that they get moved around and manipulated, they get extended, they get cross-play on different parts of the argument, which then means that they necessarily reproduce the logic of that is fundamentally passive and do not allow themselves to be haunted. This means that they link to presumption argument. This is a question whether or not they already were haunted, or whether or not the affirmative is that which instantiates the haunting in the space of the debate. In the first place, if that is true, then that means that you would vote negative on presumption because the act doesn't fundamentally do anything to introduce a new relationship, or you would vote negatively reject their relationship of authenticity because that fundamentally relies upon a structuring logic of white agency. 2-3, this turns case for multiple reasons. One is the overcomes argument that was above 2 is that it relies upon an over-representation of man so far as man becomes that which is magically agential. 3 is they have conceded that it's not a deformational practice, but it's rather a reformational practice insofar as they reform the white subject and debate as somebody who has magical agency to evoke these spirits. This means that there's traditional practice that's represented as that which is good, but that is not to do anything to change our relationship in ways which we are already structured. They say representational is bad because it's a question of how we should be citational. Yes, that is true, but the affirmative has not engaged in the ways in which the affirmative citational practices necessarily get represented within the space of the overcommons in debate. They say the man is human, this is cardinal bias, however, this is structured by the overcommons insofar as they do not undermine this practice. They say that the affirmative is the status quo suppresses spirits. Yes, this is true, but the affirmative participates in that structural action. The status quo, which is even still vote negative to reject specific ways in which the affirmative mobilizes. It should be humble and mission to spirit instead of being assumptive that you should be somebody who should affirm a relationship of authenticity, because it's not a question of whether or not we know we are authentic. With the affirmative presumption, we know what is authentic relationship to spirit. It assumes that the living know what is best for the dead, which necessarily reduces the logic of the obliteration of spirit. And the one entity articulated this as the white slave master who then goes out in the graveyard and then takes the bones of their slaves and uses them to conjure new spirits in the space of their plantation mansion. This always becomes a new violent and parasitic logic insofar as they get to reproduce the black dead body and the black dead spirit as somebody that is available for use by the white body in the space of, for example, at a debate round. They say the negative argumentation about a link to them is egoism. However, this is not true because one, they say there are no proper nouns in the blog. Yes, that is precisely the point because we are avoiding the invocation of the dead. And so far as we can have a relationship of humility in relation to spirit, we ought not invoke the name of the dead because that would simply bring them into the space of the debate as somebody who can be available and reduced to a space of an argumentation. But this always gets caught with overcommons insofar as it becomes a new essential practice in the space of the academy. They say that it's a question of how we have to they say the affirmative creates a new biochemical model for the human because it's a question of how metaphysics is structured by bioagency. Yes, this is true, but it's a question of whether or not the affirmative does that in a good way. If we want any of our case turns, each of the overcommons argument, deformation argument, or white agency, that means the affirmative creates a bad metaphysics because it necessarily produces a logic of necromancy that always consumes the dead spirit, and so far as they become available for use by a white body that they said they say that black spirits cannot consent to be used by people. Yes, that is precisely true. That is why they should not have invoked the spirits in the debate room because they do not have capacity. They being the spirits do not have the capacity to consent to being utilized as a citational practice by the one they say it's going to be done because it happens inside of the publication of a book. That means they should simply have not cited the book in their 1AC because that book now gets read by more people. And if they're critiquing it, I bet the result of the debate community is going to be that more people will utilize either this as an argument to win more debate rounds, which necessarily produces the logic of parasitism, or people read the original book, which reads the logic they're critiquing the purpose. That means that you still have a negative presumption. They say that it's a question of whether the affirmative rejects the archive. That necessarily assumes they actually do reject the archive. But if we want any of our internal link turns, that means the affirmative necessarily produces logic. They say that it's a question of whether or not the spirits can haunt us independently whether we speak to the be. That assumes that the affirmative is able to overcome the structuring logic of white agency, which they have not given you articulation of. They do not give you an explanation how it is that their new metaphysics overcomes the structuring logic of the overcommons or the academy, which means that all the space in which this occurs always has to reproduce the logic that necessarily is parasitic upon the dead, the lack of agency of the dead black spirit, which means that they link to the double mind because either they introduce a new authentic relationship or they don't. Negative on presumption. If they introduce a new authentic relationship, that means they necessarily have to rely upon the necromancy argument because they would have to do something to conjure the spirit into this case. It's a question of they also basically want the quality argument. It's not a question of whether or not the quality because they've heard that necessarily is that neoliberal qualification insofar as they get consumed by the academy in the overcommons. If there is no defense of their overcommons, indeed the one here doesn't even say the word undercommons, so do not let for two-air explanations how it is their method solves this because it's a question of an internal link turn that was not addressed by the 1AR, so you should always be skeptical of their ability to access the quality argument. It's a question of how the affirmative gets utilized within the space of the debate community because the affirmative relies upon a necromantic conjunction to look to the space of the dead in order to overcome this. They have also conceived magical binalia, which means that they necessarily rely upon a white angel subject that has a libidinal relationship to the dead black body, which necessarily produces the logic of settler colonialism and anti-blackness at the level of the spiritual, which they have conceived the magical framework, which means the question of which if we have any risk of any of our case turns or any risk of their perception of ability, we always know negative with how to embrace a relationship of humility to spirit instead of affirming a relationship of authenticity, because you can never know in advance what is and what is not appropriate or authentic. It's a question which has a more humble relationship. You can try and do less, not more, because that would always be violent.
555, I think.
Let me go find it. 555.
The lack of an alternative besides presumption is the fundamental problem of the true and are. The topic is already summoned these ghosts, already zombified them, they already haunt this activity because every time we talk about health insurance, we're always referencing that carceral ableism, those systems of medical experimentation that predetermine the way that we can relate to health, especially the way that white bodies who are perpetrated and get incriminated within this history have the ability to relate. The act does not change that because that always already exists, which the uniqueness question for this debate. This activity is fundamentally structured upon these ghosts. The only question is how we engage with the ghosts, with the haunting, with the memories, with the stories, with the archives that are already here in this activity. And the only thing that white people can do is dwell in it and let ourselves be destroyed, deformed within it, which is the study argument. And the Modi Hardy, that's the obliquely referencing violence argument that Hardy says when we mine the violence, mining the violence of the archive to expose its own opacity. Why? The 1AC said that we let these ghosts haunt us. We do not conjure them. We do not see them. We do not attempt to commune with them. Rather, we understand the way that we are affected by them, those affective relationships with them, which is the broad evidence that's necessarily good because it severs the very affective liaisons we have with the contours of white sensitivity, such that it is a deformational system. The broad evidence says that this is the only possible way that white people can engage because their impacts are inevitable, which is a unique question they're not grappled with. The broad evidence says that this is a dwelling against the archive, sitting with black knowledge, black society, with that, or engaging with that, without prescribing the modality of activism. I'm going to afford those bodies instead of dwelling within the way that we exist, which is a change in the way that we exist. That is the only deviation in the status quo I need to bring. So the only one that can incohere an ethical or unethically ethical relationship with the world. There are two pieces of offense that I'm going for. First is the carceral ableism argument. This is the alternative to white people not engaging with the reproduction of systems of carceral ableism and anti-blackness that maintain any structures and contours of civil society and make extinction and both inevitable and quotidian for various bodies. This is the alternative. You are voting for them because there's only a risk that we have done something and through the way that this magic changes us, in the way that we change it will bring us into this, which I mean not presence of the second argument, the whole playground argument, which is a conceited impact that answers all of their comments arguments. We ruptured the academic practice of representation by using representation to expose its own opacity. This is the oblique modality of reference where it's reference to that animation with the Hartman evidence. Yes, we have said those things, but those things do not conjure the ghosts, but rather they change the way that we understand a relationship with those ghosts and the cycle of necromancy within it by mining the violence to expose it. What the Hartman evidence says is the only possible way we can stop the necromantic cycles that are always already happening in these sets, which the conceded uniqueness question, the community always already co-opted. Elsie and Henry, this book was always already read in debate rounds. It's only a question of how we engage this, and they conceded a discourse reality argument that is the fundamental heart of our argument about man and representation. Man is a representational creature that is shaped by the way that we understand and embeds us within our neurochemistry. Essentially, bioaesthetic representation is only one of the Copernicus revolution, though. And Winter talks about talking about Dixon Roman evidence is the fundamental shifting of the frame, and by the fundamental exposing of the incoherency of our worldview, which shifts the way that we understand and relate to the world, of deforming our subjectivity in favor of new genres of the human, which is necessarily a good thing, which means that the reading of the 1AC link turns and solves all of their criticism and their overcomes argument, and because the interruption of the process of representation stops it in its tracks. They've said that we are citation-only indexing. Here's the problem: the affective, the app changes the way that we relate to citation. The index, the oblique referencing of violence without animation, with our argument would not produce the logic of man as aesthetic because we interrupted the cycle of man as a representational creature in the space. We linked her to the overcoming argument. They did not answer our bad debt link argument. They sit with the independent link turn to the overcoming argument. They have not grappled with the debate is inevitably set aside. The only question whether that study is deformational or reformational. They have not answered that the Inferno confronts Western debt that it cannot replay the debt and cause representing important term in the ghosts of else they citate the index refer but do not explain, preventing the white subject from filling in those gaps within it, from imagining those things that the archive will never be able to tell us, as the things like how else they felt, how they existed. Those are the things that we do not we cannot know. And we want to see the process of interrupting the drive to know them. That is a lack of recompense that prevents Western men from saving the day or creating a human standard space for new genres of the human. This and the overcommons argument. The two in our head no differential between the overcommons and undercommons. Our mode had a hard time said the undercommons had the inability to produce a policy and always plans but never solve. The other was embracing a bad death in the face of the resolution impetus to solve, which is the thing that we have to do when faced with black death of black women, because they have given us a bad death that we can never replay, which means we should endlessly be in that attempt, which means that we have evidence that is contextual. We have not brought Elsie here. Also, this who the solves all of their arguments and how spirits already been the technique debate. The knowledge critics via the attunement cannot be recalibrated other stages of the aims, refuses to answer the question and debate opposed to the resolution to solving national health, and said positive both health and insurance are possible, which is why we're able to resolve this. But yes, magic should be a structuring claim. The only question is our relationship and when that get better, when that get changes, as the way that they won't function, which they better to the reformational practice that answered by the broad evidence and the Moten and Harney evidence, which is why we do not get there. The humble evidence, the humble arguments. Their egoism is the reason why they will lose this round. The idea that simply mentioning the names of Elsie and Henry has any control or power over them is the exact fantasy of control and mastery, that drive to understand, represent it, and can have the world respond to our desire, and that they have critiqued and we have critiqued that idea, that egotistical idea, that us saying Elsie's name has any ability to conjure her in this space is the problem with the argument, because that does not exist with the argument. They have not answered from the 192 AC and cross-ex. We should not have cited the book. Citing the book is not about reading, it's about the way that these subjectivities are produced via that archival practice of reading the book. We inoculate ourselves to that position of what parasitism by deforming the contours of white subjectivity, an endless process of deformation, which is why there's no metaphysics that come out of the app, but rather an orientation that allows other worms to appear.